Well, it is official. Coach Cal will be back for another season in Lexington, and it's only a good thing if Cal decides to make some changes.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing the official announcement from the big man himself. Coach Cal is back for another season with the Kentucky Wildcats. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? I think it's a good thing only if Coach Cal decides to make some changes. We'll talk about how realistic that is on today's episode. Also, on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, Kentucky is reaching out to players in the transfer portal. Now, whether or not the Wildcats have a chance with those players, we'll discuss today, and we'll also talk about what will make a really important transfer portal addition for the Cats this offseason. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed to the show, and if you are listening on podcast, I would appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Per Mitch Barnhart at 9:16 last night, on his Twitter account at UK Mitch Barnhart, he said this: "As we do normally at the end of every season, Coach Calipari and I have had conversations about the direction of our men's basketball program, and I can confirm that he will return for his 16th season as our head coach." Coach Cal and Barnhart had a conversation yesterday about the end of the season, and KSR, other outlets have put out what they kind of think / have heard happened in that meeting. It doesn't necessarily matter now because both Barnhart and Cal decided to do an interview with BBN tonight and explain, their thought processes about what happened in that interview and the actions that they are going to take following that conversation. I am going to be honest with you, that interview that Cal and Barnhart had with BBN tonight, as much as I do like BBN tonight's programming and how they do things, I don't necessarily think that there was anything of value in there relative to what we heard from Cal in his, not post-game, but I guess post-game radio show on Monday. There was not really anything in there that kind of deviated from what Cal had to say earlier this week. Now, something that Barnhart did have to say in this conversation was the fact that there's a notion out there that he and Cal have no relationship. There's no relationship between the AD and the men's basketball coach, and he said that is just simply not true. And based on how sincere he was when he talked about it, I'd like to believe him. Now, there are a couple of different things that Cal reiterated in this interview that I think need to be addressed again. Cal talked about the defense. He talked about making changes. He talked about going out there and just grinding and just going to work, which is what he and Barnhart both had to say about this situation. Talked about the defense and how much it needed physicality and how he had guys on the roster that just lacked physicality, and so he tried to simply make them outscore opponents. And it's really brought on this thought process for me over these last 24 to 48 hours about the definition of physicality and whether or not it is the be-all, end-all, or end-all, be-all, whatever the phrase is, for your success on the defensive end of the floor. Because based on what I saw, sure, Kentucky lacked physicality, especially down low. All three of their 7-footers didn't have the weight or just the oomph, just the muscle to outplay offensive players in the paint and around the rim. Kentucky just did not have that consistently. And so I agree with Coach Cal that there actually needs to be some physicality changes to this team heading into next season. But also, we talked there in the intro about it's only going to be okay if Coach Cal returns if specific things happen, if he's willing to make some changes. And the big thing that I want to see here is Cal actually coach his team. not just be on the sidelines telling them to go fight and scrapping scouting reports, not being out there unable to draw up a play at the end of the game that will actually give Kentucky even a decent shot to put up. I want to see him out there actually coaching, and this coincides with how successful Kentucky's defense will be next season. There were so many different issues among individual players and the product as a whole when you watch Kentucky's defense that all come back to tell your guys and show them and make them do it in practice. Tell them to have their feet set. Tell them to do certain things with certain screens. Tell them how to affect the pick and roll. It's not a lack of physicality. It's mental. It's listening, getting your kids to listen. And I understand that maybe this year's team struggled to put it together or just flat out refused to play the way that the coaching staff was telling them to. Something was going wrong. And I just have a very hard time believing that the staff was not or was telling them how to play good defense, and the kids were just continuously over and over and over just refusing to do it. It does not take mental power to understand what a defensive stance is and where to be in it on that side of the floor. It is literally not that hard. It's not hard. It is 3rd and 4th grade level concepts that as humans we should be able to pick up instantly, and I refuse to believe those kids just did not understand it. Now, they could have chosen not to do it, right? They could have just chosen not to get those things down. I believe that it's probably a little bit of a mix of everything, but it leans back on, I think, Cal not teaching these kids properly how to play defense. He's been in this game for, 35 years now, coaching basketball. He should be able to go out there and teach his roster how to actually do it properly, not just go out there and beat people up. You need a level of physicality. I don't disagree with that, but I think the massive thing that Cal is missing, or at least that he's not discussing publicly, is the fact that these kids looked uncoached. These kids looked like they hadn't been told what to do, or at the very least, just straight up, or at the worst, rather, just straight up weren't doing it. In which case, I think at the end of the day, by the way, that's a reflection on you as the coach for getting those players out there collectively. That's your fault. You put the roster together. Anyway, I think that for Cal, if he's coming back, if Barnhart's behind him, if the fan base is going to step behind him, if we're going to step behind him one more time, I want to see changes. There are staff changes coming. They have to occur. Now, we don't know necessarily what staff changes are specifically happening, but we know that they're going to happen. Kentucky has to make some moves here to maybe get some different people on this staff that will actually affect the outcome of games, because it feels like Kentucky has recruiters. They don't have coaches, they have recruiters. And if they do have coaches, they're not doing their job. So actually coaching the team next season is the thing that I want to see out of Coach Cal if he's returning. We've discussed all of the different nuances of, okay, well, Cal expects a really good offense or a better defense or to win or to do X, Y, and Z. He reiterated those things, talked about how he wants a top 10 team throughout the regular season. He wants to make a deep NCAA tournament run. Cool. It all comes back to whether or not you actually coach these kids. I want to see him make that happen. I want to see him change for the better. I will believe it when we see it. And I'll also believe, when I see it, transfer portal additions. Because as of right now, Kentucky, while they are absolutely a lucrative place for high schoolers to come and play, to develop and go to the NBA, looking at these mid-major transfers or these senior veteran transfers, they're looking for NIL deals more than anything. Curious to see how Kentucky and their NIL collectives actually handle the transfer portal relative to last season, because I think it came back to bite them a lot a year ago. Can they actually land some of these guys? I will see it when I believe it. They've reached out to a few. Let's talk about them. Before we dive into some really interesting prospects that Kentucky has at least contacted, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Better Together. Has your bracket already been busted? Mine absolutely has, and you guys can see that in our bracket group. Are you tired of the same old daily fantasy grind where you make a roster, cross your fingers, and just hope for the best? or losing, on the last leg of your pick'em injury can be very frustrating. Well, introducing Better Together, it's the first cooperative daily fantasy platform where teamwork triumphs talent and you can play with your friends, not against them. You can pick more or less on real-time player stats, strategize with your partner to boost your odds, and climb the leaderboard together. So grab a friend and join the social DFS movement. You can download Better Together now from the App Store and sign in using promo code LOCKEDON for a chance to win your share of over $1,000 in cash prizes. Remember to sign up with the code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, because winning alone is fun, but it's better together. Today's episode is also brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. They offer amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing television. It provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos as well. They've got all different kinds of incredible things on there. All kinds of videos from your favorite sports brands, including us here at Locked On. If you have not checked out Fire TV channels, you absolutely should. Trust me on this. And if you want to learn more, you can visit amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. That is amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. All right, continuing along here on the Wednesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel already, I would greatly appreciate it if you did that. Talking here about how Coach Cal is officially back. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? What do you expect from Kentucky basketball this upcoming season? You can leave all of that in the comments below. Of course, we'll be discussing that for the next several months about how Kentucky basketball looks, especially as they shape their roster around their incoming recruiting class. Cal is back, but I expect changes to be made in order for it to be a successful, good thing. And Kentucky right now trying to make some of those changes, trying to get more experience, trying to get older, and they've reached out to a couple of transfers that fit that bill. UTSA transfer Jordan Ivy Curry is among the players that Kentucky basketball has reached out to. One of the more recent players that Kentucky has reached out to was a guard at UTSA, University of Texas at San Antonio. He has also been contacted by, just brace yourself for this list of really good schools, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Virginia Tech and Virginia, Texas A&M, LSU, Seton Hall, Ole Miss, Penn State, Boston College, Arizona State, Auburn, and Xavier are two of the most recent teams to also contact him alongside the Wildcats. He averaged 17.1 points per game this past season on some pretty interesting shooting splits as well. So just to give you kind of this kid's history before we dive into the stats, he started as a freshman at UTSA, CUSA freshman, named to the CUSA all-freshman team, 7.2 points. Then he averaged 13.9 in his sophomore season with the Roadrunners. And then he transferred. He transferred to Pacific, all the way out on the West Coast, 10.3 points per game. And then he transferred back to UTSA. So he's got 3 years with the program, but sandwiched in between that is a year all the way out playing for the Pacific Tigers, I believe. But this past year, once he came back for his senior year, 17.1 points per game, averaged 5.2 rebounds per game, 3 assists per contest. All 3 of those numbers are career highs, averaging almost a steal per contest as well, shooting 38.7% from 3, which is a good mark there, and then 40.1% overall from the floor. That is his second best shooting split of the season there from the floor. So he's a good outside shooter overall. From inside, not as efficient, but he definitely can put it up. Experienced guard, 6'2", 175 pounds. Again, 3 years at UTSA, 1 year at Pacific. And I think that Jordan Ivy Curry, while he may be an interesting prospect, Cal talked about something on his radio show today, in his interview today, that I not only do I agree with, but I think will be interesting to see how Kentucky handles it. Because as much flack as we give Cal and we give the staff in this program for maybe not succeeding in certain areas, this is something that I can definitely envision being difficult to handle. The fact that guys like Ivy Curry enter the portal and you're like, okay, there's an experienced guard that kind of fits our bill. We need a point guard, we need a shooter, and then we need somebody at the 5 spot that can kind of be our solidified starting big man heading into next season, most likely our starting big man heading into next season. Ivy Curry kind of fits in between that point guard, shooting guard role. You could absolutely bring him in. But you know that the NCAA tournament is not over. You know that the transfer portal window is going to be open for a hot minute, and you know that there are going to be guys that enter that are similar to the players that you are looking at now. You have to be very careful with how you monitor and how you pick and choose these different guys, because while a lot of them are probably going to end up going to other schools here, you may end up picking one and then seeing 3 days later a player that is statistically way better, fits your scheme way better, and may be just as interested, if not more interested, than the player that you got to commit to your school. And so guys like Jordan Ivy Curry, while I find him interesting, he's a good three-point shooter. He can distribute a little bit. He can play that 2-guard role. He can play that 3-guard role. I think that Kentucky is going to have to be careful with how they monitor their options. They at least got to reach out to them first, and actually get them interested. But they've got to be careful with how they monitor their options. Also, 6'2", 175 pounds. If we're talking about getting more physical on defense, if that's what Cal wants to do, is 6'2", 170, 6'2", 175 what you're going for? Or do you want guards that are a little bit taller? Do you want guards that are a little bit more physical? Because there are guards that we're going to talk about today on the show that I think maybe fit that mold just a little bit better. So Ivy Curry, while I absolutely would not scoff at him joining the team, I know that there are going to be different players that enter the transfer portal over the coming weeks that I think Kentucky's going to want to take interest in. So Jordan Ivy Curry, I think, can fit the mold. He absolutely can fit the mold. But what else is Kentucky looking at in the transfer portal, and what are some players that they also should be looking at that they've not reached out to yet? Let's get into those here in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Nissan. This week's March Madness Bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking a team that stands out, a team that has pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. The North Carolina Tar Heels can only be described as an armada, and this one seed is as hardcore as it gets out there. It's no wonder why they secured a spot in the Sweet 16 this Thursday against Alabama in the NCAA tournament. They are a favorite pick. They're a favorite pick by many to make a run for the NCAA championship. You could take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. You can shop all of those SUVs at nissanusa.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by eBay Motors. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. They've got over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You will always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every single time, or you get your money back. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. You can keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, continuing along here on the Wednesday edition of Locked On Kentucky, let's talk about some transfers. So we discussed Jordan Ivy Curry as somebody that could fit the mold of what Kentucky basketball is looking for. And to be honest with you, just to recap, just the brief thoughts I had earlier, they need a point guard. They need an experienced point guard that can lead this offense. They could definitely take a shooter, whether that's at the shooting guard spot or on the wing there at the 3, and they need a certified like physical big man. Not just some random 6'11", 220-pound forward. I'm talking about a center. I'm talking about a center with some weight to him, between 6'9" and however tall Kentucky basketball wants to go for. They need an anchor down low. And he doesn't have to be particularly productive. He can be somebody that averages 6 to 7 a game, 7 to 8 rebounds a game, somewhere around there, but has played at a high level, knows what physicality looks like, and can be a genuine rim protector for Kentucky. Because Kentucky, right now, has 2 very young centers in Somto Cyril and Jaden Quaintance. Quaintance coming in as a 17-year-old, he's going to need a lot of time to truly develop. Somto, a little bit more physical than him, but I'd be curious to see what his role would look like over somebody like a 5 or power 6 transfer addition. So we talked about Ivy Curry. Let's take a look at some other players that Kentucky basketball could land. They've reached out to Clifford Omouryi. We talked about him earlier this week, a transfer from Rutgers who was solid for 4 seasons at Rutgers with the Scarlet Knights. Kentucky offered him coming out of high school. St. John's right now is a team that is very interested in him. I think Kentucky is also in the mix as well. This kid, I think, anchored one of the better interior defenses in the Big Ten for the past, I would say, 2 seasons for sure. 3 seasons, you can also make that conversation as well. He was their primary center on a team that was really solid in 2-point field goal percentage and effective field goal percentage as a whole. Also got some blocks as well. So not only was he blocking shots, he was affecting shots. That's something that we think is really important here on the show, talking about what makes a good rim protector. It's not just a kid that racks up blocks. It's a kid that also just affects shots and holds teams to a low field goal percentage. So Clifford Omouryi, I think, could fit that big man role. Also a little bit more versatile, I would say, than maybe your typical 5-man, but I like that in him. I think Kentucky could utilize that, especially with some of the quick pieces that they put around him. I think it could be fun, but he's got that anchor in him. He's got that dog in him, as some people like to say. So Ivy Curry also, I think, could be somebody that Kentucky pursues right now. Absolutely. We talked about him just now. So let's get to 2 more transfers. Jalen Blackmon. Jalen Blackmon is an interesting prospect. 6'3", 180 pounds, out of Stetson. Played his first year in college at Grand Canyon, then transferred to Stetson. It's been there for the past 2 years. 21.3 points per game this past season. 90% from the foul line, 38% from 3, 47% from inside the arc, all of those solid numbers, while averaging almost 3 rebounds and 2 assists per game. Defensively, not a ton of stats to go off of here. Not a ton of stats to go off, period, outside his shooting numbers and his points. 21.3 points per game. He averaged 15 as a sophomore, by the way. He was on the court a lot for this Stetson team, and I believe they lost to UConn in the first round of the NCAA tournament. If I'm not mistaken, he had 14 points in that game, did not shoot well from beyond the arc. But the game before that, for Jalen Blackmon, 43 points per game, 43 points total, 5 of 9 from 3 in the ASUN conference tournament, also was ASUN tournament MVP. Jalen Blackmon, I think, would absolutely be a very, very interesting piece for Kentucky basketball. And something else to look at here. He's from Marion, Indiana. He's the son of former Kentucky Wildcat James Blackmon. So you've got the Kentucky tie. You got the regional tie. You got a bucket getter. Kentucky's looking for a bucket getter. 6'3", 180 pounds. Make it happen. I'd like to see this happen. I'd like to see Jalen Blackmon in a blue and white uniform next season. I say yes to this. There's nothing else I have to say here. I don't want to say he's a must get. 21 points per game and then 43 in your conference tournament championship. You're looking for kids that can step up. That's a kid that's shown, even in the last few weeks, hey, I can do that. I can do that for your team next season. He's somebody that I would go after. And then the final kid I want to talk about here is Marcus Hill. 6'4", 185 pounds. 185 pounds. Played at Bowling Green this past year. 20.5 points per game. 5 rebounds. 2.6 assists per game. Did not shoot well from 3, just 29%. But he was a bucket getter. And I think that at 6'4", almost 190 pounds, you could find somebody on the wing that kind of plays a physical role for you. Sure, they don't have to be 3-point shooters. Kentucky's going to have those. You're going to have those in guys like Boogie Fland. I think Carter Knox also could be somebody that steps up there. Travis Perry's going to be really good off the bench shooting the basketball. This is somebody that I think Kentucky could look at here as a possibility. And something else interesting about Marcus Hill is previously, before his stop at Bowling Green, he played 2 years at Southern Union State Community College in Alabama, which is, I think, really funny. Just he's from Chicago. So he went from Chicago to Alabama to Bowling Green, and it'll be interesting to see where he goes from there. It's somebody that's near Kentucky that they could definitely look at, that has the size, I think, that matches maybe the description of the type of player Coach Cal is talking about. So it's Ivy Curry, Cliff Omouryi, Jalen Blackmon, Marcus Hill. We'll see what happens here with those different guys. Is Kentucky going to land any of them? I'll to be honest with you, until they start to get some of these kids on campus, there's no telling where these kids are going to go. Also, the NIL factor is something that's really weighing on a lot of people's minds. So we'll see what happens. We will see what happens. But I want you to tell me, what do you think in the comments below about these transfers, about Cal, about everything? That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_ and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless.